And all right. Oops. All right. So we are going to pick up right at the end of where we were last week. We were finishing up with the Douay-Rheims preface and its arguments for Latin Vulgate onlyism. We picked up last week with argument 9, in which they gave a list of issues. This was the longest of their 10 arguments for sure. They gave a list of their issues. One had to do with the diversity of translations, the dissensions, the disagreement, and so on and so forth, and even Luther's concerns. And we covered all of that last week. Beza, having noticed that some translations and translators prefer to be different than to be accurate, we covered that as well. His issues actually were with Sebastian Castello. And then that some English translations, or the majority of English translations, were ignoring Beza's decisions when some of Beza's decisions, showing that, again, I think their intention was to undercut Beza's ability as a text critic. And so they gave 2 examples. And the first one they gave had to do with in Luke 3:36, whether or not the son of Canaan should be, that phrase should be in there. And we covered that last week and the stakes. And that was actually, when I first initially started working through that, my idea was, Beza just got this one wrong and move on. But then I realized that Beza had gone a lot further. He thought he was going to harmonize the New Testament with the Old Testament, Luke 2 or Luke 3 with Genesis 11, according to Beza. Then we went into the Septuagint readings. We went into the different dates and the timelines and the genealogies and the differing of readings to try to reconcile what's going on in Genesis, because there's a lot going on in Genesis there, how those differences came to be, and how those differences ultimately would impact Beza. And then Beza would then make a conjectural emendation, meaning he disagreed with all of his Greek texts that were in front of him and did his own decision until he received Codex Beza, which we said was named after him when he was done with it, which is now called Codex D. So Codex D came in, and that manuscript in particular was very old, very ancient, and it has a lot of unique readings in it in the Gospels and Acts. And it's just so happened that the reading that he chose, where you omit the son of Canaan, is in Codex Beza, and so he used that to justify his translation. His translation. He used that to justify his translation, Codex D. So, and then I just showed that Codex D is pretty well known for having unique readings, and that it's a tough one for scholars because it is an old manuscript. It carries some weight, but because there's so many unique readings, it doesn't carry a lot of weight, because it's hard to tell if it's just one of these unique readings or if it's actually something that the apostles would have written. And we covered another situation as well. Then the last one, I know I covered it in my video because I had to re-record this when I got home, but I don't remember if I actually covered it with you all here. The Acts 1:14 passage, where Beza chooses to say that the apostles were with their wives in Acts 1:14, as opposed to what most translations say would be that the apostles were with the women, the other women. And the Douay-Rheims translators here are saying that Beza got this wrong, that they have a footnote here. It says the heretics in the text, other in the margin, translate wives, to wit, of the apostles, most impudently, knowing in their consciences that he meant Mary and the other holy women that followed Christ, such as in Luke 8:24-10. And then it says, see Beza and the English Bible in 1579. I don't know, again, I don't have the English Bible in 1579. The Geneva one is what they're referring to. So I don't know if it said that, but I had a number of people, because I covered this last week, I had a number of people reach out to me, and I had already come to this conclusion. I just didn't go through all of the Greek last week, but everyone's in agreement. There's only one way to translate this phrase. and it's with the women, not with the wives. So, and I scoured not just the Greek, but I scoured every single English translation I could get my hands on, and not one English translation agrees with Beza here. So what's the issue here? Beza's wrong. Douay-Rheims translators called him out, and they got this one right. And so we have to say what's right, and what is right, and what is wrong. Beza got this one wrong. And so I have said, a pastor friend of mine who's been following along in the series, he messaged me and he broke down the Greek. He's like, if the Greek reads this way, it's wives. If the Greek reads this way, it's women. And as far as I know, there's no other way to handle this. It's always this way. And I was like, I've come to the same conclusion. I just didn't break down the Greek that way. But anyway, it was nice to get the feedback from people who did actually know the Greek. And then, so yeah, I think Beza got this one wrong. It should be with the women. I don't think you can pick up a translation and find one that agrees with Beza. So it doesn't impact us today, but it was an issue of that day, and the Douay-Rheims translators called them out. And so that was that. Again, but to be fair to Beza, he's human, and he never claimed perfection. All right, and then the last argument that we covered was argument number 10. It is not only better than all other Latin translations, but than the Greek text itself in those places where they disagree. And here is where they went that extra distance, and they said, hey, where the Latin text disagrees with the Greek, Latin wins. We don't care. Ultimately, this is the thing, is they could have just started with argument 10. They didn't need all of the other things were to build up to argument 10, but argument 10's the final issue. And this is what I say even to all KJV onlyists, is they'll provide any evidence that they can that supports the KJV. It doesn't matter what it is. They'll provide evidence to support it. But at the end of the day, I'll ask them, does it even matter what the evidence is? Because really the only evidence you need is that the KJV is right. And that's what's happening here. It doesn't matter what Jerome did. It doesn't matter what Augustine did. It doesn't matter what Beza said. It doesn't matter what Erasmus said. Ultimately, the Latin Vulgate is correct. And it's better than all the other manuscripts. And so when it differs, Latin Vulgate wins. Latin Vulgate wins. That's just how it is. So, and that's the same thing. We watched a clip from a pastor last week preaching. I'm not going to play that clip again this week. I think it's going to try to come up. We're just going to skip through it. If you want to watch that clip, you can watch it in the video next week or last week. There we go. And then I ended the class primarily by saying that I do appreciate the onlyist traditionalism, not the arrogancy, not the absurd amount of confidence that they have, but their traditionalism, and their traditionalism that forces correctors to show their work, to do their due diligence. And again, even these guys, as traditionalists, catch Beza making errors and call him out on it. And those errors should be called out. Those corrections that are actually errors should be called out. And the corrections that are true should be corrected and moved forward with, which I said will bring a new generation of onlyists. Now, that's going to be key, because the onlyist generation doesn't come up in the beginning. It comes up with the next set of correctors. So you're not going to read about Latin Vulgate onlyists in the medieval times or even in the early church history. You're going to find Latin Vulgate onlyists in the Reformation, because that's when the corrections were happening. You're not going to find Septuagint onlyists until you see people trying to correct the Septuagint with the Hebrew. Then you'll find Septuagint onlyists. And you really don't get a real sense of KJV onlyists until the late 1800s, early 1900s, when the next set of correctors come out and try to correct the Bible. Then you'll get another set of onlyists, the KJV onlyists or the Textus Receptus onlyists. And so when that happens, it's always the next set. So currently, we are in this period of correction. We're in the middle of the Reformation, if you will, right? Where corrections are happening frequently as we're discovering things and we're developing. But at some point, the text will stabilize like it did at the end of the Reformation, like it did at the end of the church, early church history. It'll stabilize. A particular Greek text will come out that will be like, hey, this is the best we can do with what we've got currently. And when that stabilizes, then it'll stay that way for some time until we get something new that comes out. We find a new discovery, or we realize one of our text critical methods was flawed and we've corrected it. And so it gives us a different reading, and we'll have a new set of onlyists that come out. And it will be something like the Nessalons 29 onlyists or something of that nature. It will be a new set, and it will force the new set of correctors to do their due diligence as well. I only say that as someone who's been observing church history and seeing it come about. And I don't think we're really any different. And so I see where we are in our situation compared to where the reformers were in their situation. We're in the same situation today that they were in as far as the text of our Bible is concerned. And yet none of their faiths were shaken. None of them thought, oh, we don't have a Bible or anything of that nature. They actually deal with that very question as to whether or not your faith should be shaken over these things. Erasmus does, and we're going to cover that later when we start talking about scribes, how scribes handled textual variants throughout church history as an overview as we finish this. And then the last thing that we covered, or actually I didn't cover it with you because I didn't have time, but I did cover it in my lesson last week, was remember that the Douay-Rheims was an apologetics Bible for the Roman Church. And so as you read through the Bible, on nearly every page, you will find a footnote somewhere on that page, most certainly, about what the heretics believe. Us. What do we believe as heretics? And so here is just one example I pulled up there were so many, but this one I pulled up because I found it interesting that they named names. Normally they just generalized us as the heretics, but here they were like, no, we're talking about very specific heretics. And so in John 10:1, it says, Amen, amen, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbeth up another way, he is a thief and a robber. And their footnote, a footnote says this, the thief is a heretic, especially, and any that unlawfully break upon the sheep to kill and destroy them by false doctrine and otherwise. He is a thief and a murderer. So came in Arius, who was actually a heretic, Calvin, Luther, and all heretics, and all that succeed them in rheum and doctrine. So they just straight out. Imagine you had a study Bible today that did that. I would find it exciting, but that'd be pretty crazy today for a study Bible to be like, hey, those guys over in that denomination over there, they're heretics, and I'm going to call them out by name, and here's why. Hey, if they were actually heretics, I say name them. Let us know who they are so we can divide from them. But we just don't do that. We just attack the ideas. And I think that's the right way to handle it. Attack the ideas, not the people, because the people can change their mind. So anyway, that's the sort of stuff you're going to see in the Douay-Rheims Bible pretty frequently about what heretics believe and why they're wrong. And so I actually use the Douay-Rheims quite frequently when I'm studying to see two things. One, what did the Roman Church apologists believe during the Reformation? And what was their objection to Protestants during the Reformation? And then I attempt to see if I can actually corroborate their attack on Protestants with what Protestants actually believed. Sometimes it's obvious because we still believe it. Other times it's not obvious because I don't know where they got it from. But I use the Douay-Rheims pretty frequently for that because the Roman Church study Bibles today, they're very different. They're more like Protestant study Bibles in that they're just telling you what that verse means and historical information, and then they might actually reference you. We'll talk about Roman Church study Bibles, but reference you to a catechism or something of that nature to support what they're saying in the study note, which I think is also helpful. But there's nothing like this. Even the Geneva Bible doesn't go this far. In any of their later editions, they'll attack Roman Church beliefs, but not like this. And I would say they generally don't refer to them as heretics, but at the same time, they're also very harsh with them, having no problem calling the Pope the Antichrist and things of that nature, and things of that nature. So that's that. That's the end of the Douay-Rheims Bible, and we're going to pick up now with King James the Sixth of Scotland in 1567. We are introducing him as King James of Scotland and not King of England, because at this point in 1567, Elizabeth is still queen. She's still alive. She's Queen of England, but James is King of Scotland at this point. And there's a few things that are going to transpire in Scotland that are going to sort of help set the mindset, the framework for what's going to happen in England when James takes the throne. So some influential things. Scotland had very much been influenced by the Protestant Reformation, particularly by John Calvin. John Knox, who was a protege of Calvin, just like Beza was, Knox would return to Scotland and turn that country into what will become known as Presbyterianism. And Scotland Parliament eventually passes a law that allows all of its people to read the Bible in their own language and to have it translated to that end, and required every church to have an English Bible. Now, the Geneva Bible is the Bible that fulfills that slot for quite some time. The Presbyterians really like the Geneva Bible. However, in 1601, King James had a General Assembly convene, and one of the decisions in that assembly was made to update the Geneva Bible. And the update for Scotland will become called the Burnt Island Bible, and it's called Burnt Island because that's where the assembly took place. So that's the location. Now, this event specifically, some historians try to tie this update of the Geneva Bible to the Burnt Island Bible under King James as some sort of precursor to the King James Bible itself. And there's really no connection between the Burnt Island Bible and the Geneva Bible and the Bishop's Bible and the King James Bible, other than the fact that King James presided over both. But there's no actual connection between the Bibles themselves here. So, but that's kind of gets you the mindset where you can get in kind of King James' head as to what's happening in Scotland. 1601, he's still not yet King of England. I should have probably updated that slide to say 1601. But in any case, 1601, and 2 years later, Queen Elizabeth dies at the age of 69. And we need to remember the church that Queen Elizabeth left behind. She left behind a Church of England to be something of a middle ground between the Roman Church and Protestants. All right, she was not willing to go fully in one direction or the other. Edward, her stepbrother, or no, her half-brother, I should say, her half-brother was Protestant. Mary, her half-sister, was Roman Church, and she was like right in the middle. She was an intermediary between the two. And so all of the decisions that she made, her and Parker, I should say, her and Parker made to this end would be collected into what is called the Religious Settlement of 1559. Now, we didn't really talk about it, but we did talk about some of the things that are in the Religious Settlement, such as the Act of Uniformity, that you're going to use the Bishop's Bible and you're going to use our updated Book of Common Prayer, the Act of Uniformity, and the Act of Supremacy, making herself governor of the church. She wisely did not make herself the head of the church like Henry did. She made herself the governor of the church. The head of the church is Christ. And then, so this move of establishing what's called the religious settlement created division within the Church of England. And these divisions are actually very complicated, and it's really easy to overgeneralize them. And I'm going to do exactly that because we're not going to get into all of the nuances here. I'm going to do my best to generalize them appropriately, but it's still going to be an overgeneralization as to what's taking place here. So this will kind of set the stage as to the division that's in the Church of England when James takes the throne as inherited from Queen Elizabeth, if that makes sense. Her decisions had certain impacts. James is taking the throne, and he's got to deal with these impacts now as the new king and new governor of the church. First, there were separatists. Okay, separatists believed that the Church of England was beyond reform, and they separated themselves from it, starting their own independent churches. For the context that we're going to get into, because we're dealing with the KJV Bible itself, The separatists have no impact on the KJV Bible. Okay, they're not a part of this. The next is the Puritans. Okay, Puritans were members of the Church of England who did not believe the church was beyond reform. Okay, the Puritans are going to try to reform or purify the church, hence Puritans. They're going to try to purify the church from within it. Very much the same way Wycliffe tried to have reform in the church within the Roman church, and Erasmus tried to have reform in the church within the Roman church. These Puritans are going to stay in the Church of England, though they're trying to reform it from the inside or purify it from the inside. Puritans had a wide spectrum of beliefs. Some of them were just slightly more Protestant than the Church of England and wanted to see minor changes occur. They would still be considered Puritan. Others were wanting to go full-blown Presbyterianism. Okay, but the Puritans would never depart from Church of England distinctives. They're going to stay in the church and affirm Church of England distinctives. If you had issues with the distinctives at this point, you became a separatist, not a Puritan. Okay, so they're going to stay with the distinctives of the Church of England, but some of the stuff that weren't core doctrines to the Church of England, they would want to see reformed, or core practices, because it may not be doctrinal exclusively. And some have suggested that it would be better to call these people nonconformists as opposed to Puritan. And so I'll use nonconformist and Puritan interchangeably going forward. All right. So if I say Puritan or nonconformist, I'm talking about the same people. The next group were the conformists. Okay. These would be the ones who would submit themselves to the church in the state it was in, and to the queen or king and its bishops. Okay. As the church went, they went. They were going to just follow the authority of the church. They're just going with the flow, if you will. They're not rocking the boat. They're conformists. And then the next ones are called avant-garde conformists. Avant-garde conformists. Avant-garde conformists, you might also call these people anti-Puritans. Okay? These ones are more than just conformists in the sense that they're not just going with the flow. They are actively trying to get the Puritans to change their mind and cause and force unity in the church. So the division, the outright division, what people would see, what people would feel, would be the Puritans versus the avant-garde conformists. This is where the clash is going to take place. Okay? And so the avant-garde conformists are the ones who are going to lead the charge in trying to unify the Church of England and the division by beating down Puritan thought. Okay, what the Puritans want to change, the conformists don't want to change. They avant-garde conformists don't want to change. And so when King James got the official word that he was going to take the throne as successor to Elizabeth, he was on his way to England to become the king, and he was already getting letters from the nonconformists that the things that they wanted to change. He wasn't even like officially titled king yet. He was, for all intents and purposes, but he hadn't gone through the formal routine yet. So he's getting letters ahead of him, and they waste no time. They want their agenda heard. They want to let the king know about the issues that they have with the Church of England, and that since he's going to be the new governor of the Church of England, how to make it right. Now, King James is coming from Scotland. This is really important. He's coming from Scotland, which is what? Mostly Presbyterian at this time. And the Puritans have definite Presbyterian leanings. Some of them want to go all the way to full Presbyterianism. They can't go all the way because of the church structure, but at least doctrinally. And so they're thinking, they have high hopes that this king of Scotland is going to be Puritan. He's going to side with them. And so the nonconformists, they have a letter that they're going to send to the king. And the letter is called, it's nicknamed the Millenary Petition. The full name is the Humble Petition of Ministers of the Church of England desiring reformation of certain ceremonies and abuses of the church. That's the full title. And this is the introduction to the Millenary Petition from the Puritans, okay? To the most Christian and excellent prince, our gracious and dread sovereign, James, by the grace of God, we, the ministers of the Church of England that desire reformation, wish a long, prosperous, and happy reign over us in this life and in the next, everlasting salvation. Okay, so immediately appealing to him. This is actually not super uncommon if you read the prefaces to a lot of Bibles. They often start similar to this when they dedicate to the Queen of England, like the Geneva Bible did, or to Henry, or to the Pope for Erasmus, things of that nature. All right, so that's just the introduction. This is the body of the letter before they get to the actual complaints. And so I'm just going to highlight two things here. I'm not going to try to read the whole thing for the sake of time. But the first highlighted section says, we the ministers of the gospel in this land, neither as factious men affecting a popular parity in the church, nor as schismatics aiming at the dissolution of the state ecclesiastical. So essentially what they're saying here is, hey, we're not trying to be schismatic. We're not trying to be divisive. Okay, we love the church. There are issues we want to see addressed. We want unity, but there is division, and we believe if you hear our grievances, we can affect unity. Okay? And then the second section says, although divers of us that sue for reformation have formally, in respect of the time, subscribed to the prayer book, some upon protestation, some upon exposition given to them, some with conditions, rather than the church should have been deprived of their labor and ministry. Yet now we, to the number of more than 1,000 of your majesty's subjects and ministers, all groaning under a common burden of human rites and ceremonies, do with one joint consent humble ourselves at your majesty's feet to be eased and relieved in this behalf. All right, so here they're saying, yes, we have subscribed. We have submitted ourselves to the Book of Common Prayer, but not without exception and not without some conditions. We did that because we didn't want to leave the church. We did that because we believed the church benefited from our ministry. And so we just want to see some of these things updated. And then they try to put a little bit of weight in this, and they say that there's 1,000 of these Puritans who are asking for this Puritan, not Puritan people, but Puritan bishops who are asking for this reform. And that's how this document gets its name, the nickname, the Millenary Petition, from that remark that there's 1,000 of them. However, we know very well that there weren't 1,000 signatures on this or 1,000 plaintiffs on this document. It seems to be kind of embellished to get the king's attention. So much of their grievances. So I want you to point out here, I want to point this out here because this has been a running theme. I introduced the Book of Common Prayer early because the Book of Common Prayer is going to be the central issue with the Church of England leading up to the King James Bible. Okay, so much of their grievances are with the Book of Common Prayer, and what they're asking for is for it to be updated to reflect certain issues. And so there they list their grievances. They list them in 4 parts. All right, the grievances are in 4 parts. 1 has to do with the church services, 2 has to do with church ministers, 3 has to do with church living and maintenance, and the 4th one has to do with church discipline. And so I'll cover in summary what each of these requests are because they're somewhat long. So this is the first one. The first one the first of these 4 from the nonconformists have to do with church service. And so I'm going to leave this up there as I explain it. I'm not going to read it, but if you go back and you read it online, all the power to you. You can also find it on particular websites. So the first thing they want to get rid of is the making of the sign during the sign of the cross during baptism. They felt it was a Roman church practice, and they did not want to do it anymore. All right. It's a lot of symbology in certain things, and we're not going to get the full effect of the symbology because we're not living in the time. So to us, something like making a cross before baptism may not sound like a big deal, but to them it was a big deal because of the culture that they were in at the time. Okay. In that, they also wanted to stop asking babies questions during the baptism. This was a common practice. Do you affirm the Apostles' Creed? Do you affirm the Nicene Creed? Yes, you do. All right. Okay. Asking for confirmation. Again, asking the baby if they want to be baptized. Okay. And the argument from the Puritans here is that they thought these were just extra They were just nonsense. The baby couldn't answer them. And so these should be removed from the baptismal ceremony. Remember, they were infant baptizers in the Church of England. And also keep this in mind, the Puritans here are not trying to get rid of infant baptism, just the silliness of asking babies questions during the baptism. And then the last one was they also didn't want women to perform the baptisms. And this one I was like struck by, because I didn't think that was ever a thing in the Church of England. And so I went and looked, and the Book of Common Prayer does not allow for women to baptize babies. But what I learned through my research, because I was like, why is this even an issue? Why are they bringing this up? What was happening is there was a decree for emergency baptisms that midwives would give to babies when a child was born and they thought this child's not going to live. So we need to baptize the baby now. The priest isn't going to get here in time. So this would be considered an emergency baptism situation. And the midwives would perform that. The Puritans were like, no way. There's two things that need to occur for the baptism to be legitimate. One, it needs to be done by the bishop or the priest, and it needs to be in a formal ceremony. That was the Puritans' argument. So they thought this was really undermining the church here. Again, they're not getting rid of infant baptisms. They just don't want to, they don't want some of this stuff to occur. The next thing they address is clergy dress. They had very formal outfits. They said they don't want to, it's more of another Roman church tradition that they're seeing influence their church. They want it out. Communion, they wanted people to be examined on their faith before taking communion. So essentially, actually be interviewed before you took communion every time. Wording in the Book of Prayer, they wanted certain things like priest and absolution. And they also, the Church of England was divided over whether or not wedding rings were used during a marriage ceremony or other things. They wanted the wedding ring out. No wedding rings. We have them. You're going to see some of this stuff actually impacts us today. The next thing, the wording, okay, service length. They thought church services were too long and wanted them to be shorter. And then church music. They wanted church songs to be simpler and more focused on helping people understand the faith better. So they wanted them to be more doctrinally centered as well. Then Sundays and holidays. They wanted Sundays to be treated as a special religious day. No work on that day. But they didn't think people should be forced to stop working on other religious holidays. So maybe there, a Good Friday or something of that nature. They'd say you could still work on a Good Friday, but Sunday, restrict that. So they were trying to get that set. Consistent teaching. They wanted the church to have one set of official teachings so that everyone would be on the same page. They wanted no Catholic ideas. They didn't want any Catholic belief to be taught or defended in the Roman church anymore. And then bowing at Jesus's name. They didn't want ministers to be required to teach the people to bow whenever the name of Jesus was spoken. And then they wanted only the official canon to be recognized as part of the church and to be read in church. This was an attack on the Apocrypha. They wanted the Apocrypha out. Okay. And so you can see the Geneva Bible's already done that. Geneva's already doing that. And so you can see some of this affecting the Church of England here. Although, again, they didn't eliminate the Apocrypha altogether, but not as official doctrinal teaching. Okay. And then I'm going to say this. Timothy Berg has a website called kjbhistory.com. And he actually covers the issue of clergy dress and some of these other things more in detail, giving you more of a historical setting. I just didn't feel like I needed to spend that much time on this particular thing. But he does a good job if you want to read more on that. So that was the first issue, which was a lot of issues, but it has to do with the church service itself. The next thing was concerning church ministers. Church ministers, they wanted better preachers. They wanted only capable and well-educated men to become ministers in the future. These ministers needed to preach regularly and put special focus on teaching on Sundays, the Lord's Day. All right. The second thing, the non-preachers, the ministers who are already in preaching positions but couldn't preach effectively, they suggested two options. One, remove them from their posts and then provide them financial support. In other words, just they're not preachers, but we don't want to kick them out onto the street. So we'll still support them, but get them out of the pulpit. Or the second thing, if they had good income from their church position, that they would pay someone to preach on their behalf. Those are the two options that they asked for. Okay. So if they made good money, leave them there, but they would be responsible for paying another preacher to preach on their behalf. I was like, all right, these are interesting. These are things we don't really think about today. Ministers living in parishes, they didn't want ministers to live far away from the churches that they were supposed to be serving. This was called non-residency. They believed ministers should be present with their congregations. And this is kind of where we still do some of that stuff today. Ministers marriage legal again. They wanted to bring a law from King Edward's time that made it legal for ministers to get married. There were a lot of restrictions at this time. They wanted those restrictions removed to allow the ministers to get married. And then limited agreement for ministers. They didn't want ministers to be forced to agree to every single detail within the articles of religion. Instead, they should only agree to the core beliefs of the Church of England. Okay. So if there were some tertiary issues, don't force them to agree on every single matter. Allow them to have some of their own views. And they needed to affirm the core beliefs of the Church of England and acknowledge the king's supreme authority over the church, as already stated. They were reaffirming that. All right. Concern number 3 from the Millenary Petition had to do with church livings and maintenance. So concerning church ministers. One, this all has to do with how the bishop receives his income. It's all about his income. Essentially, bishops need to give up extra jobs that took them away from their church, that provided them good finances. They needed to give up extra jobs within the church. So sometimes the church had multiple paying positions, and they would take on 2, 3, or 4 of them and receive the pay for all of those positions. And they said this actually hurts the church because they can't do all of them well. So they need to give up the other ones and let other people take those. There was also colleges and church properties that were being leased to the bishops, and they were at a much higher rent for bishops than they were for everybody else. They wanted the rent to be the same for all people, including the bishops. And then the church properties that were coming in with a lot of income, they wanted some of that money to be set aside for the bishop and the church, not just for the person who would be overseeing the church property. They were getting all of that money that was coming in. So instead of the person overseeing getting all of it, they said to, I believe it was 7 or 8/10, something of that nature, be set aside for the bishop and the church itself. And then the last one was church discipline. All right, church discipline. They wanted the church discipline and excommunication to be carried out based on Christ's teachings. But what they wanted primarily was that the issues actually to be fixed, not just to immediately excommunicate someone, but see if they could actually resolve the issues. And then who can do the excommunication was another issue. They didn't want excommunication to be decided and announced by non-clergy members, like chancellors or officials. They believed this power should reside within the church leaders themselves. Could you imagine just people like getting up and being like, you're excommunicated, you're out. So yeah, church leaders would be involved. Don't excommunicate for small things. There's actually in the let's see, right here, that men be not excommunicated for trifles and 12 penny matters. 12 penny matters is just an idiom in their day for meaning insignificant things. I thought that was cool. That's my own thing. So not excommunicating for insignificant things. They wanted the pastor to have a say in the excommunication. The local pastor needed to agree before someone in the congregation could be excommunicated. To stop unfair fees, certain church officials were charging unreasonable fees for their service. They wanted that to stop. No renting out church jobs. So if you, I'm the Sunday school teacher, maybe this was a paying job in that time frame. It's probably not, it wasn't even a thing back then. But anyway, and I was like, well, no, I'm going to rent out the Sunday school position to someone else and collect that fee. They're like, stop doing that. Stop renting out the ministry you're a part of to make money. Get rid of any of the old Catholic rules that would be that have been put in place, such as restrictions on when people could get married, like what times of the year. Speed up church court processes. So when there was a crime or a lawsuit, one put against each other, these would drag on for many years, and they wanted that to be shrunk down. Okay. And then limit self-incriminating oaths. This would be the equivalent to our pleading the fifth. They wanted that to be done less often. They wanted the ability to plead the fifth more often is what they wanted. Self-incriminating oaths is what they were trying to get rid of. And then be careful with marriage license. They wanted stricter rules for getting marriage license without traditional public announcements. So normally there would be a public announcement, and then you'd get your marriage license. Sometimes people were getting their marriage license without the public announcement, and they wanted that to end. Okay. And then this was how they were ending the letter. I'm just going to cover part of this here. These issues, along with other problems, were still happening within the Church of England. We can show that the Bible and these practices don't line up. If you want to hear more, we can talk about it in person. That's what they're saying to King James. And then they said, but without us explaining further, we believe that you, our good king, a good Christian, has already seen and can figure out for yourself the cause that is just. And we humbly pray to God that he will guide your royal heart to do, or to that you will do what will bring glory to him, what is good for the church, and endless joy for you. And then they end with, your majesty's most humble subjects, the ministers of the gospel that desire not a disorderly innovation, but due and godly reformation. And that's how they ended the letter. So King James becomes king in 1603. He's getting this request. After some time, King James now becomes King James the First. He's the King James First of England. Okay. And he officially takes the throne. And at some point, he calls a conference at Hampton Court. Here, he would hear the state of the church and any issues that he felt necessary to address. It was at this point, James's allegiances were made very clear. He was not interested in the issues of the nonconformists that the Puritans brought up. It wasn't that he dismissed them. He does address them and their grievances, but he just doesn't deal with them the way they want him to deal with them. But overall, James had no desire to change the direction of the Church of England from the trajectory Elizabeth put it on. He was going to side with the conformists, not with the Puritans, ultimately. And this became evident when he called for the conference at Hampton Court. He invited over 20 avant-garde conformists and only four Puritans to the conference. And on the first day, he didn't let any of the Puritans in the conference. He only let the avant-garde conformists in, and the conference began. James opened with an hour-long speech. He explained that contrary to a century of English monarchs who've seen that the change was the only thing that seemed to be consistent, he had no desire to change anything. He wanted to confirm what he felt was already established well already. He said that he was not here to cause any innovation, but he wanted to acknowledge the status quo. Let's see. He set the agenda. He was going to deal with confirmation, the General Assembly, private baptism by laypersons. James says in this part of this that he would sooner have his children baptized by an ape than by women. So that was what he said. And then the bishops, according to one of the historians, Harley, the bishops were discussing legends of ancient fathers baptizing children with sand because water was unavailable. And James responds with, that's a turd for an argument. And then he says, in his vulgar way, that he might as well have peed on them because that would be more like water than to sand. This was how he was addressing some of these issues. When Puritans raised some of these issues on day 2, they were informed that some of these issues had already been decided. They were already late for the party. And so we'll pick up with this next week. We'll pick up with the 3 days of Hampton Court, but it is here in Hampton Court where the decision is made to update the bishop's Bible to the King James Bible. And it has to do with the problems with the Book of Common Prayer. And so we'll conclude with that next week, and we'll get into the King James Bible next week. You all are dismissed. Thank you.